The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to the Trident Paranormal Show, right here on Parasearch UK Radio, with your host, Paul Rook.
Good evening, everyone. It is now 1 minute past 9 on the 14th of March 2017. That only means one thing. Yes, it's the Trident Paranormal Show. And tonight I'm joined by a very special guest of mine tonight. Last week I saw a post on Facebook regarding a book that Andy Gilbert had written in relation to police paranormal stories. So I just had to talk to Andy, so I got in touch and he's very kindly offered to join me on the show tonight. So hello, Andy.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
No worries, it's a pleasure to have you on, absolutely. So, can you tell me about your book that you've written? What's the title called?
It's Credible Witness, Paranormal Police Stories, and it's a collection of stories that of witness accounts, if you like, from police officers or members of the police family that I've put together, and I think it's the first book of its kind in the UK. I think there's been one in the States, but in terms of UK paranormal police-related stories, I think this is the first one.
Oh wow, absolutely! And are you part of a paranormal team yourself, or are you independent?
No, I'm totally independent. I've got no paranormal experience. I'm not a I've got no background in paranormal. I'm not an academic or anything like that. I'm just somebody who had an interest, and I decided to start making some inquiries and follow something up that I had an interest in it, in as much as that when we used to be at work and you'd be sitting perhaps with a partner in the early hours, I'd often ask people, have you ever seen a ghost? Yeah. And I was surprised how many people had, and people started telling me about incidents that were also related to the police, and it sort of just became a thing that I just had an interest when I was just generally talking to people. Have you ever had a paranormal experience? And late on in my career, not long before I retired, I went to an incident in Streatley, which isn't far from, about 8 miles from Birmingham, yep, where a call had come through from a security guard it was a newly built apartments for retirement apartments, and he said the lights were going off and on, and he could see people in the lounge area. And so me and a colleague went there, and we met a young lad who was this night security, and he was absolutely terrified. And he said the lights, no one had moved in yet. It was just in the final stages of completion. Yeah. And the lights kept going off and on, and he couldn't explain that. So he was trying to investigate why the lights were going off and on. And he saw an elderly couple ballroom dancing in the lounge area.
Oh, wow.
And of course, there was nobody there. Of course, he then left there and telephoned the police. We went with him, tried to reassure him, search the premises. But what can you say to him? Other than it was just very, very strange. But I didn't disbelieve him, and I could tell by the way he was. He seemed genuinely frightened about the experience that had happened. Yeah. And a couple of nights later, when we were still on nights, we decided to call back and perhaps just pop in just to make sure he was okay, because we thought, well, he's obviously had quite an experience. But we went to the place, and lo and behold, there was a new security guard there, and that guy decided he'd had enough and he'd left the job.
Oh, wow, okay. So is it quite common occurrence within the police then that they get called to things a bit similar to this?
Well, I probably at that stage I had probably 26 years in, and that was probably the first time I'd gone to anything like that. But it did reignite my interest at that point in all the stories that I'd heard before. And when I subsequently retired, I started asking more and more questions and asking people, well, have you ever? And it started in a very small circle of people that I knew, people that I'd worked with. And then via social media, I started asking. And I was starting to collect some very interesting stories. And I just thought, well, I think someone should put all these together purely from an interest point of view, because it certainly was an interesting project for me. And I was genuinely amazed at what people were telling me. People who I knew, people who I'd had face-to-face interviews with, people who I'd interviewed on the phone. And I was astonished at what they were telling me. And I didn't disbelieve a single word that I was being told.
Yeah. Is that what inspired you to write this book then? That whole incident?
Like I say, I've always had an interest in as much, but not a what I would say I was a dedicated paranormal person who was interested in that. But I've always had an interest in this sort of aspect. And I thought, well, now in 2012, with all the government cuts, officers with 30 years were forced to retire. And so I then started, I did some voluntary work working with adults with learning disabilities, but also took up writing, and I wrote 3 other publications which are police related, but nothing to do with the paranormal. And then I thought I'm going to finally do some research and spend some time looking at the police and paranormal side of things. Yeah. And so, after a year and a half of tracking people down, interviewing people, doing my research, this little book is the result.
Fantastic. Richard Clements in the chat room, he's just written a question. He said, do the police have a protocol to follow if they come across something unusual and possibly paranormal?
I don't think there's an actual protocol, but you will find that there have been an awful lot of freedom of information requests from journalists regarding the paranormal, asking how many calls the police get. You can find these online. Now, within these calls, obviously, some of them will be crank calls, some of them will be mistakes, but you have to see that there's an awful lot of people have contacted the police about paranormal incidents, but there isn't an actual official sort of police protocol as such for dealing with them. I think there used to be for unidentified flying objects, and there's a couple that are featured in the book. But no, there's no specific protocol.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe there should be something set up, maybe, to contact at least a local scientific paranormal group. That might be interesting to work out. Yeah.
It's again, the thing is with the police, and the whole subject is you people are very sceptical.
Yeah.
And police officers, I found that some of them were telling these stories for the first time because they were concerned about their professional reputation and the ridicule that would follow. So one of the things I do hope is that more and more people will start talking about the subjects and be quite open about it, because if we all start talking about it, then I think there's a lot to be learned and there's a lot to be gained from that. So I think it took a lot of courage for some of them to take part in this. Some people didn't want to, or contacted, or had been put in touch with, and they declined. But the ones that did, I'm very grateful that they did.
Yeah. So since you brought out this book, has any more come forward?
Yes. When I started telling people the book was out on social media, I've been contacted by 4 other officers regarding 4 other paranormal incidents that have happened. And obviously, had they contacted me before, they would have gone in the book. But who knows, if more and more people get in touch, there might be a second volume in due course. I mean, this is from a fairly small circle, from my circle going outwards of people I know, people I've worked with, places I've worked with, and then spreading out on social media and various other places. So it's still, there's about over 40 stories in there from my circle, and I think there are an awful lot more stories out there to be told.
I'm sure there would be. Have you thought maybe of not only seeing like the ghost stories from the police, but maybe other emergency services?
It's something I certainly would consider. I would imagine that I know there's a couple of incidents in the book where hospitals are mentioned. So I would imagine that nurses and doctors and people who work in hospitals would be able to fill a book. I would imagine. I don't know.
I'm sure they could actually. Mm-hmm. Just on one doctor, maybe, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So you've obviously they're paranormal stories. So are they just about ghosts? I mean, you mentioned UFOs, but what about cryptozoology, the study of creatures and animals, strange animals that roam in the countryside and stuff? Have you got any of those in there?
No, I haven't. There are two. Well, I mean, what I found interesting was that how different the various stories were in terms of people seeing people walk through walls, people seeing people who had passed away. There's one story where there's a vehicle chase, and it unfortunately ends up in a fatal accident.
Okay.
And the officers see somebody run from the vehicle, who they know.
Yeah.
But it transpires that that person was actually dead in the car.
Okay.
And yet these two officers, so it's corroborated, had seen that person run from the vehicle after it had crashed.
Yeah.
And when the fire brigade came and removed the roof off the vehicle, that person was actually inside and had unfortunately passed away. And you go from that extreme to a very quite detailed UFO sighting, and then you have stories about shadow people. Then you have stories of haunted police stations where objects are being thrown across offices. So there's a whole wide range of incidents that people came forward with that I found fascinating.
Was there any stories that you listened to and just thought, I'm going to leave it out of the book because I think it's not something that could be backed up, or you just thought was totally too faked, as so to speak?
No, because I when I look around and when I was doing my research, and when people got into people volunteer to get in touch, and the majority of the people I know personally, and at no point did I doubt anything that was being told, or nothing seemed to me to be. Whilst I found it, astonishing and amazing, at no point did I think anyone was not telling me what they believed to be the truth. Had that been the case, I wouldn't have put it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was anything that I thought, well, that's just. If I had any doubts, I mean, although I'm not a paranormal investigator, obviously, as a police officer, I have done a lot of investigations and spent a lot of time gaining evidence from witnesses, etc.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's why I didn't feel that. That's why I've called it what it is, the credible. I felt all these people.
Yeah.
In my professional opinion, were credible and honest in what they were telling me.
Yeah. Did you work with any other paranormal team in putting this together as well? So
No.
If there was any pictures or anything, I mean, I'm assuming maybe some police officers might have had photographic evidence of what they saw.
There was one. I don't put photographs in the book purely because I self-publish and everything goes to various charities. So I keep my costs down. But there's a UFO sighting in the book, and there were photographs taken. And this goes back, I think it was to the 70s, and they were actually at the time they were produced. But what the officer says is that the ones that were actually published publicly, he said that they were nowhere near as good as the ones he'd taken, which they didn't publish.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see those. It really would. Just sort of to have a look to see what they did actually witness, and whether or not it could have been explained naturally or something like that, because that would be quite interesting to look.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, that particular story gained a lot of. There was a lot of publicity around it, and people came from America to interview the officer. All the officers had to put statements in. Again, there was a group of officers and a large number of members of the public who actually saw the objects in the sky.
Yeah.
And it was also believed to have been seen in Northumberland before it was seen in the Walsall area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting story.
So what is? Do you remember what the weirdest story that you have got in the book?
I think there's. I don't know if whether it's not. There's a couple of stories that I think are because of the backstory to them. There's one of an officer who saw another officer out on patrol, checking doorways and what have you, which he thought was very, very strange at that time because it was his beat and there would be no one else there. And when he walked up to meet the officer, that officer had disappeared, and he went back to the police station and explained what had happened. He asked if anyone else had been out. He thought it was really odd that somebody would be following him around doing what he'd just done. And they said, "Oh, that would be the ghost of a PC, John King, who passed away some time before." And when I looked I did some checking on the police records, and indeed there was a PC, John King, who had passed away at that station when he paraded for night duty.
Yeah.
And I found that quite poignant, really, because the officer himself who told me the story said perhaps it was John finishing his last patrol after all. So I found that quite a nice story in a way. There's no fear factor to it at all, but I just found it very interesting because at the time we just said an officer had passed away, and then I did my research and found, well, yeah, actually an officer had passed away on night duty in that area.
Okay, very interesting, that one. Yeah.
And also I had one in Bishopsgate Police Station in central London.
Yeah.
And when the story came to me, it came in sort of like a statement form from the officer. They typed it out very neatly, and about the events that took place there. And part of it was, this is probably one of the more detailed ones because it happened on a few occasions. She was lying in a bed because they had some actually accommodation on top of Bishopsgate Police Station, and it used to be a police hospital during the war. And she was actually, a woman came into her bedroom in a lace collar and gold-rimmed spectacles and tucked her in. And she didn't realise, obviously she realised that something very, very unusual was taking place. And when I made my subsequent inquiries sometime after that with an officer who worked in the City of London, he said that the name of the ghost is believed to be a nurse called Evelyn Rolfe, who was a nurse who was killed during the war. And he also then sent me a picture, and the picture is of a woman who's got a lace collar on and gold-rimmed spectacles. But the witness who gave me her statement didn't know this information. So I think that gave it a lot of credibility.
Yeah. Well, someone in the chat room, James Steele, he said, what's the oldest account or story? Relevance being the oldest ones before paranormal groups would have been at a minimum. So, yeah, what is there any stories that you heard of going back 30, 40 years, maybe 50?
Yeah, I think they range from 1968 to 2015.
Okay, so you got quite a lot of versions there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so what is there a story that stuck out to you to be one of the best accounts?
I think the Carpershoot one. I think the Bishopsgate Police Station. But there's a real wide. Like I say, I don't want to be. I suppose I should be blowing my own drum. I don't think there's any rubbish stories in there. Put it that way. I think people will find it a really interesting read because you've got you've got spirit. It goes from a spiritual possession, whereby the police officers attending the scene had to call out a priest, and again, that was a very, very detailed one. There were other people. There were other police officers present. There were the family present because it was a young child that was experiencing these problems. And you go to one about officers waiting for a suspected ram raid in Woolworths on Erdington High Street, and they are confronted by a big, what I think they're called shadow people, a great big massive black shadow who spoke to them and wished them goodbye. And I remember when I was doing the book, when I was actually in the stage of writing it, I put that out on my Facebook page, and someone was quite cynical, because I put a picture of Woolworths and said this was the subject of a haunting by when officers were waiting for a ram raid in 1998, and someone said, "Oh, there's no such thing as ghosts. There's just oversensitive people, and it's all a load of rubbish." But that person didn't know that the witness to that event, was an ex-Royal Marine, who's seen active service, has been decorated, and is also boxed professionally, and he's not somebody who scares easily. And I thought at the time, well, if you met that guy, you wouldn't tell him to his face that you think he's that he's not telling the truth, and you wouldn't tell him to his face that you think he's oversensitive. Again, I think a very credible witness account, and quite strange. I mean, I went back to the shop. I just happened to go back. I was in Erdington shopping, and I popped in. It's not Woolworths, of course. They've all closed down. And I spoke to one of the managers and said there have been other incidents in the shop, things flying off shelves, and somebody else seen an apparition in one of the offices, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, that's it. That is interesting. How did you get to initiate the talks with these other police officers when writing your book? I mean, you said that you knew some of them, but how did you get to know about the other ones? Did they come to you, or did you approach police stations and ask? Or
it started off with me just ask the stories that I knew. I contacted those people direct and said, would you be prepared to help me with this project? And thankfully people were. And then whenever I went, I put it out on social media. I started asking. I just went out. Funny enough, I went out for a drink and just said to somebody, this is what I'm doing. I got a story that way. I went to a funeral. What are you doing? I said, "Oh, I'm doing." He said, "Well, let me tell you about this." And so wherever I went, I was just in police circles. I told them what I was doing, and sort of word spread locally. And then I used social media, Facebook, and I got in touch with the Retired Police Officers Association as well, and they were very helpful. And I got some stories from people came forward from those.
Okay, that's interesting. So has any paranormal teams come forward and offered you any of their assistance?
No, I mean the book's only been out a few weeks. I mean, I contacted the local West Midlands Ghost Club, and there's Susan from Paranormal Junkies has been a fantastic help to me.
Yeah.
So I contacted her because I wanted to get some feedback from somebody within the paranormal community, and so I sent her a copy and I said, "Look, what do you think?" And she gave me some good feedback, and she found it to be a very interesting book, which reassured me because I didn't want it to be it's a things that go bump in the night, nudge nudge. It's all a bit of a joke because I think it's a subject that needs to be treated with respect, and I like to think that in the way that I've got the book together and prepared it, that I've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was Susan that put me in touch with you initially. Because that's where I first see the post about your book.
It's been fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've even, I'm going to get the book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm definitely going to go and buy it. So, whereabouts would we be able to go and get your book?
It's available on Amazon in both paperback and to download. $2.49 to download, which is, I think, about the same price as a coffee. Yeah. And it's there's about 40 stories. It's about 100 pages long. It's a quick read. It's a good couple of hours read. And all the royalties go to a charity that's quite dear to me. It's the Cherry Orchard Garden Services in Burntwood, where they adults with learning difficulties, they teach and train them to be gardeners, and they actually go out in the community doing gardens for other vulnerable people. And my son George has got autism, and he goes there 4 days a week and works hard. And so I thought on this occasion I'd go for that charity.
Excellent. Well, someone in the chat room, Kerry Greenaway, she said she's actually just bought the book, and Richard Clements has put the link to that. So if anyone is in the chat room and they want to buy the book, it's a complete bargain. Go and buy it, and you're helping raise money for charity.
That's very kind of them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I'm definitely going to buy it as well. So at least you've got 2 sales.
Well, that's fantastic, and it does all help, and it is going to a good cause. But I genuinely hope people find it interesting, because this is coming from somebody who's not in the paranormal community, and these are stories from people who were going about their business and weren't looking for anything paranormal, but something real, some real strange, unexplained incidents happened to them. And it's from a group of people that are skeptical. And skeptical is good, because, you can't just believe everything people tell you. You have to have evidence, and there's a lot of the people who took part in this project are very skilled investigators. And, they cannot explain what happened to them, but they've told me. I've tried to do the story justice, and I've tried to treat the subject with the respect it deserves, because there are sensitivities around it, because some of the ghosts or spirits, of course, these are they are known by name. So I had to be careful with some of the detail. I couldn't put all the detail in because to be sensitive of how families might feel about that.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm just going to have a quick 30-second break, and we'll be back very shortly after this.
Hi, this is Mark. You can join me and Kerry at 9 p.m. every Friday night on the Dark Night Show, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Hello, this is Kerry Ann. Please join me every Thursday at 9 p.m. on Seventh Sanctum, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Hi, my name's Lee Steer, and you are currently listening to the Trident Paranormal Radio Show on Parasearch UK.
Good evening and welcome back. I'm joined by Andy Gilbert. He is author of a book called no, it's not paranormal. It is Credible Witness, and it's paranormal police stories. So, Andy, is there any stories in the book that you just found totally astounding, made your jaw drop, sort
of? I'll be honest with you, most of them made my jaw drop. Quite honestly, because I went into, I'd heard the various stories, and there are some that you would think, well, that is when you're seeing somebody walk down a road and then somebody walks through a wall. Yeah. That is astonishing, but that is something that you have heard of, what people have heard about, ghosts walk through walls and what have you. But there was one story where an officer on patrol one night saw a young lad, and the young lad actually ran through him. Okay. And that when I was interviewing him and when he was telling me, I mean, it's not it is a cliche, but the hairs did stand up on the back of my neck. It was just, and I found an awful lot. The more as people were coming forward, and once I got reassurance, look, I said this isn't a joke project. I'm just going to use first names in the acknowledgements.
Yeah.
They were okay. I mean, some people actually said, "I don't care. My name is. You can. This is what happened to me, and I don't care what people think." But it is a sensitive subject, and I was just genuinely astonished with what I was being told, and how the different stories, how there was so much difference in what people had witnessed.
Yeah. So did you have many officers then that just said, "I don't want my name associated with that, but you can tell the story"?
Yeah. In the main, although that was my sales pitch was, look, as long as I know who the person is, because I didn't want second-hand stories. I wasn't going to be prepared. Well, so and so told me this, and this is what happened. I'm saying that I need to speak to so and so, otherwise it doesn't go in. But I said, look, I'll just, as long as I know who you are, as long as I can speak to you, as long as I can, satisfy myself that that it's genuine. And I don't think people would come forward because there's no one gets any kudos for coming forward and telling me these things. No one's getting paid. No one's making a penny. Yeah. And, even to share it with me, I mean, I found that some people still found it quite upsetting and, were genuinely very tearful when they recounted what had happened because it was such a major life event. If you see somebody walk through a wall when you're on foot patrol and then that person just walks through a wall, you are never going to forget that moment, and sort of having to recount it can be quite upsetting and emotional.
I bet. Was there any police officers or serving or retired that, because of their activity, went on to study the paranormal, or did they not get that far?
I don't think, as far as I'm aware, none of these people are involved in anything paranormal, or investigations, or have taken that further. I think they've just it's quite strange. I think because it's like there's one where two officers who are attending an incident, and a highwayman goes across the road in front of them on a horse. It's not, although they realise it's not an actual highwayman.
Yeah. But
for all intents and purposes, it's a highwayman who's just from hedge to hedge, gone straight in front of them, and of course they're on the way to an emergency incident. Yeah. And it's only after they've dealt with the incident they manage to calm themselves down and say, well, what happened there? And they both saw it, and it's quite strange. But of course, then they go to another incident and another incident. And the nature of police work is such that the next day they're dealing with something else. And I don't know, it just becomes another event that just that's happened to them.
Yeah. So what are you going to go and do from like this point? Now you've written the book and possibly looking into the second one. Has that inspired you to look into the paranormal a little bit more, or even explore the paranormal to greater depths?
It's made me an awful lot more interested, because as I was doing my research and I was checking, finding out about areas where the police were involved in various things, it really did give me an interest, and I think that I'll carry on sort of trying to look for these stories and trying to interview more and more people, because I do think that in any investigation, whatever the nature of it is, an eyewitness is sometimes the best form of evidence.
Yeah.
And what we have with this book is essentially a collection of eyewitness accounts of something that they can't explain and I can't explain. Perhaps somebody can, perhaps somebody will one day, but it's such a fascinating subject.
Yeah. I've heard. I went to a location quite recently, and they, the police were called to this location, and they like disturbance inside, so they've kicked the door in and found nobody there. Is that quite a common call for some of the stories that you dealt with?
That there are stories very similar to that. And I mean, I think last year there was an incident of a poltergeist in Scotland. I think in Rutherglen. I think it's very easy to find if you Google it. Scotland.
I think I do actually remember the one.
Yeah.
Is that the one with the levitating dog?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Now, I got in touch with Police Scotland, left them all my details.
Yeah.
But they never got back. Now, I thought that was quite astonishing. I mean, I'd love to have spoke to those officers. But if you've probably got that incident, you've probably got the Enfield haunting, when officers were present when things were being moved, and I think you've also got the Stocksbridge bypass incident, which are probably the three most well-known police-related incidents. But as can be seen from what's happened, is that the stories are out there, but there's a reluctance within the police service to talk about this thing. And I think there's a reluctance in other areas as well, but there's a reluctance for fear of ridicule about talking about this thing. And so I think
from my point of view as a paranormal investigator, when that Scotland case come out and it was reported that police were witnesses to this, like some of the activity that went on, it all come about at the same time The Conjuring 2 come out. And that film is all about the Enfield haunting. And it just resembled too much of that case for me to think, well, okay, well that... I mean, I would love to talk to the police officers. Just to find out if they can confirm. Because I wouldn't doubt a police officer if he said that he saw things like that move. But we only had a newspaper report.
Yes.
Sorry. So... I mean, I would love to know whether or not they did actually see things like that go on, or whether or not it's just a report from the house owners just so they can make money out of more paranormal teams, because that seems to be a reoccurring theme these days. So it would actually be quite interesting to see whether or not that is a genuine case or not. I don't really know, to be fair, but it just struck me a bit odd that came about in a newspaper report a few weeks or days after The Conjuring 2 come out. And it was like, really? I don't know. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I would love to talk to the police officers. And again, another case that we looked into was the 39 De Grey Street in Hull. And we've actually got, I think, Richard Clements, who owns a station, he's asked for under the Freedom of Information Act, whether or not we could have access to some of the police reports regarding that property, because apparently police officers have been called there quite a lot, and we just want to confirm that is actually what happened, whether or not we can confirm that. So I don't know how far along that's came. So hopefully Richard's in the chat room. He could possibly let us know how that went on. Yeah,
I'd imagine you could get some information via the Freedom of Information of that force, because it's a fairly straightforward question that you're asking. How many times the police attended a certain location? And like I say, journalists, they do it periodically, asking how many sort of paranormal or types calls the police have had, and then they just do a very general, bland cover story.
I mean, I can understand that some police officers might not want to come forward, as you said, for the ridicule. But from my point of view, I need their story to confirm what I'm looking into as well. Yeah. Because, it's almost... We're sort of almost doing the same sort of job. We're investigating the paranormal because we understand that a little bit more, and we're more scientific in looking at that sort of activity. And it's almost... Ideally, it would be absolutely fantastic to work with the police to some of these calls. But I don't think that will happen. Not in my lifetime, anyway.
No, I don't think it will happen. But in terms of actual solid locations, I mean, and another reason why I think the book's interesting is because a lot of police stations are being closed down now, and some of the police stations featured in this book have been knocked down, and so in terms of an actual historical document of the folklore or what's happened there, I think it's quite nice to have it recorded somewhere, because otherwise these stories will get lost.
Absolutely. There is a website online called the Paranormal Database, and that's it's a bit similar to your book in regards to a paranormal team will go out, or normal general member of the public, and if they have a paranormal experience, they can put it on this database, and a lot of paranormal investigators do go through that and look at certain cases, and it's sort of a way of us picking up cases. I've used it a few times for various locations that I'm looking at, because with my company, we do tours and stuff like that and events, and we tend to look at areas. So say for example, I don't know, we've got a ghost walk coming up in Epping Forest, and we will collaborate with this paranormal database to look at all the cases that have been reported from other teams, so we can put together all that information. We'll do history on it and everything, and we can do the whole package, and out comes this tour out of the whole thing. So it is important to get these reports down on paper. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to reading your book. Really am.
Yeah, well, I hope you enjoy it, because it's a genuine book, in my opinion. Like I said, I've tried to treat it with respect, and I didn't doubt anything I was being told from the witnesses that helped with the project. And it's down, obviously I'm very grateful for them to actually to speak about it. I mean, some were actually quite relieved to talk to somebody about it, if that makes sense, because they've never actually sat down with anyone who's not going to and say, well, look, I'm really interested. I'd like to know what happened, and not judge them, because there is a stigma to people reporting unexplained things, and because the first thing people say is, they start questioning their sanity. But people in the book have done that themselves. And I just hope more and more people will come forward, because there's nothing to ridicule. We don't understand everything in this big wide world. So people should talk about these things. Yeah,
absolutely. So, are you a skeptic or a believer?
I would answer that by saying I was interested. I had an interest, but now I'm a believer.
Awesome.
Because of the nature of what I've getting this project together, I can say I believe in the paranormal. I believe in ghosts. I do not doubt any of the people that helped me with this project. So yeah, although I've never seen a ghost, I feel there's a strong body of evidence that there is, and I think that the contributors have done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know that there's, I think it's in Brighton. They've got a ghost. There's some ghost companies that do events, and they do the Brighton police cells. Would that be something that you'd be interested in going to put into your next book, possibly?
If there were witness accounts available from people who had an experience there, then absolutely. Okay. But like I say, it's not dealing with the folklore or the rumor or the old tale of something. I would need for the way I write with on this particular subject, I need to have a witness or somebody with intimate knowledge of the event that's being described.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to go, say, for example, to an event and go.
Oh no, I'm not saying that I wouldn't. I mean, I would be interested in going to events like that. I'm talking about whether or not I would put
put that in a book.
I'm interested in that sort of thing, and I think my interests I will be sort of looking at various paranormal and ghost tours certainly in this part of the world.
Yeah.
But in terms of if I was going to do another book on the subjects, then it would be on the lines of witnesses.
Absolutely. Yeah. That makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So, tell us more about this charity that you're raising money for. Is there anything in particular that they need, or is it just general running of the charity that you're raising money for?
It's Cherry Orchard Garden Services. So they actually there are staff there and sort of like tutors, and then the workforce is made up of people with disabilities and learning disabilities, and then they go out and they have contracts, for example, like in churches and schools and in private gardens, some of which are actually vulnerable people. So you have a situation where vulnerable people are doing the gardens for vulnerable people, but it's run like it is run like a business, but it's a real good community service with what they do, because they're obviously looking after the people, and people are learning not only just gardening, but they're learning life skills and preparing people who, like my lad, he's a great lad, but he's got autism, and so he sees the world slightly differently. And he's been going there since he left school 4 days a week, and it's fantastic with the work they're doing with him. And he comes home covered in mud because he's been working, he's been mowing. And I just think it's, obviously they need, they have to maintain their vehicles, they need equipment. But my other books, I've helped the Samaritans and I've helped local charities in Tamworth where I live. But I thought this one, I'll just do one that's a bit personal to me, because my son goes there.
Fantastic. I do know a few people that go to, although it's not a garden centre type thing. We've got one that's local to us, and that's they run a pet shop. And they help people mainly with mental illnesses. This one, so that I can understand, and I'm quite happy to support those. I'm quite happy to promote anything to do with charities. So I don't know. Maybe when you've got your next book out, we can do this again and have
fantastic.
As well. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, do you think there will be a sequel?
At the moment, I hope so. I can start. I can start looking now and asking people again, saying, "Well, look, the book's out now. If you've got something you want to tell me," and I think I'll start researching and see if I can find more witnesses to more events. Hopefully, this will encourage people to come forward, and might get a few more people to, if they see the way I've treated the subject as well, it might give them the confidence that to come forward and speak with me. Like I say, it's only been out a couple of weeks, and I've got 4 more very interesting accounts that I would follow up. But I'm just, it's like I say, I'm just, I'm not a paranormal person. I'm not an academic. I'm just somebody who thought, well, look, it'll be interesting. I hope people find it interesting. A collection of stories from the police community. I just thought people find it interesting.
Oh, they do, definitely. I'm based in Essex, so is there any stories in your book about Essex?
Essex, where have we got? Let me have a look. We've got, I know we've got Sussex, not Essex. No, I think the closest we get there is probably London. I don't think I've got any Essex ones. No. Okay. Obviously, the most of them take place in the West Midlands. But I have gone as far as Nottingham, Staffordshire, Sussex, London, Shropshire, but Manchester. I'm just flicking through the book now. No. There's even a story there from Western Australia, a police station in Western Australia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. A guy who I used to work with in Warsaw, he transferred to Western Australia, police officer there, and he told me a story about Cottesloe police station and an incident that happened to him there. And he'd just come over to see his relatives, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, oh well, and then he related the story. Then he I asked him about it, and then he sent me his sort of statement. He wrote it down and sent it to me. I thought, fascinating. From Wolverhampton to Western Australia, but I didn't, unfortunately, get to Essex.
Oh, okay. Essex apparently is supposed to be the most haunted county in England. So I'm surprised that no one's actually come forward. But you never know, do you, really?
No.
You can do Australia, just not Essex.
Yeah.
Essex police, come and sort it out.
Yeah, well,
Get your stories in.
Yeah. If anybody knows anybody who's involved with the police or police-related stuff, and by all means get in touch on me via Facebook or on Twitter, Andy Gilbert at the Crocodile Court or Andy Gilbert Books. I'd love to do another book. So if people know, people have relatives, if people have heard, or if people have just got a line of inquiry for me to follow up, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be really good. I'm looking forward to that, absolutely. Yeah. Mark D in the chat room said that there are former police officers in Pitsea and Basildon, apparently, that have got a few stories. So, never know. Head there first, I think.
Well, if he wants to email or send me their names on Facebook, great. Yeah, I would speak to them.
Oh, there you go. There you go, Mark D. Definitely do that. It's it's good. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, but sadly, we have come to the end of the show. Yep, we're running out of time. So I'd like to thank everybody that's joining me in the chat room tonight. It's been an absolute blast, as always. And if you have got any last-minute questions that you just want to ask, go for it. But, yeah, definitely buy this book. It's out on Amazon. It's called Credible Witness by Andy Gilbert. Police Paranormal Stories. And how much again was it, Andy? £2.
I think the paperback is $5.99 and the digital download is only $2.49.
Oh,
but if you buy the paperback, get it from Lulu, because a greater percentage of the money will go to a charity then.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so go and do that and buy the book and watch out for the sequel. Yeah, we'll get you back, Andy, for the sequel.
That'd be brilliant.
So you keep me posted on that one, and we'll announce it over the radio, and we'll get you back. Yeah, look forward to it. But as I said, sadly we have come to the end of the show. Next week we do have another person to interview, but I can't remember who that's going to be. I've got interviews right up until April now. So it's like, who am I interviewing next? Don't know. But join me next week anyway for that interview. And I'm just checking the chat room now. Okay, Akela Anne said she just wants to say a big thanks to Mr. Gilbert. As an aunt of an autistic child, fundraising for support is such an important thing. So she wants to thank you for that. Absolutely.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for joining me tonight on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're fantastic to talk to, and I'm really looking forward to this sequel.
No, cheers. Thanks for it. I know it's difficult listening to my brummy tones drone on for an hour, but thanks for everyone who's listened in and everyone who's bought the book. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And yes, everyone's saying what a great guy you are, and it's fantastic listening. So I don't think the Brummy accent put them off, to be fair. Okay, so yes, thank you for joining me, and it's been fantastic. So that really only leaves me to play the end of the show jingle. So I will see you all again next week for another interview, and have a safe week and have a good week. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Trident Paranormal Show. See you all next week for another amazing topic. Good night, everyone, and thank you for listening.